This week we're going to talk about something that I've realized that we need to talk about more exciting things in the future. We're going to talk about fundamentals. This week we're going to get into the distinction between strategy and tactics and why you need both. So I remember as a newly minted engineer, I would hear my managers talk about strategy and tactics all the time. And I didn't fully understand the distinction between the two of them or what they were or why that mattered. And so I imagine it might be the same for you. So I'm going to try to rectify that a little bit today and give you a working definition that we can bring forward when we're talking about a lot of interesting topics in the future about strategy and tactics and the distinction between them. Now, obviously, these things, strategy and tactics, have a very strong connection to war, to the army, to the battlefield. And you can go back to like Sun Tzu and the Art of War, and you can find definitions about strategy and tactics. And so we could spend the next 10 minutes launching into a long discussion about Karl von Clausewitz and Zum Krieg and all of the sort of the navel-gazing war pornography that management sometimes, or management jargon sometimes tends to derive from. However, I think we should try to avoid that as much as possible. And as a rule of thumb, I try to avoid too many military analogies, really for two reasons. Number one is that in most scenarios, most of the time in most companies, most of management has nothing to do with warfare and the battlefield. And you really needlessly pulling from a fount of violence to keep going there when you're really talking about something that can be pretty simple like strategy and tactics. And the second one is it also doesn't travel particularly well across cultures, across age groups, etc. Where your relationship to violence, to warfare, to whatever might be very different than somebody from a different country, and that might bite you. So we're not going to use those analogies. When you Google the topic, you also get into quite a lot of boring management literature that I try not to be on this channel, where they talk about strategy and tactics in very grand terms for how organizations work. And a lot of the literature around strategy and tactics and around how strategy in particular is very firmly rooted at the corporate management executive level and how you rally an organization and how you do all of the things that big shot leaders do. I think though that the words are useful for much more than that, and the concepts are applicable for things that might seem much more banal than something as grand as setting the strategy for a multinational corporation. It can be used in your day-to-day. So in the simplest possible way, strategy is the higher level objective and plan, and tactics is how we achieve that plan. In other words, strategy is how do you use the strengths that you have towards reaching a certain objective, and then tactics are the things that fall from that, the things that you do as a result of the strategy that you've set. Let's use as a concrete example the reason that I figured that we needed to talk about this, which is that I was thinking about a video about time management and how you run your calendar and how you organize your time, as that's one of the standard topics that come up as soon as anybody transitions into a more senior management role. But as I was doing that, I found myself realizing that you can't really talk about it without knowing the distinction between strategy and tactics. Let's use the calendar as an example. For the tactics of a calendar are things like, let's make sure that you have all of your one-on-ones in one block and one day of the week. Let's make sure that you don't have 30-minute slots that are unusable on your calendar and you defragment that instead. Or make sure that you don't schedule meetings after a certain time in the day. Really things that allow you to organize your calendar, but takes the calendar to some extent for granted, and the calendar and the plan for granted for your week, and works around that. Those are tactics of calendar management. Strategies of calendar management try to change the entire picture of how you allocate your time to better achieve the goals that you've set for yourself to achieve. One strategy of calendar management might be that you see that you're spending way too much time on bug grooming in your calendar, way too much time on just reliability topics, for example. And so, a tactic there might be to shorten those meetings and say, hey, we're going to have 30-minute meetings instead of 60-minute meetings. A strategy would be to appoint a role instead to own those things for you and say, I'm going to bundle all of the QA tasks, all of the bug tasks, all of the reliability tasks under this person. I'm going to task them to figure out how to make our situation here better, thus allowing you to remove entire chunks of priority from your calendar and manage them in different ways that we've talked about 1,000 times before. Another sort of strategy of calendar management might be to say, hey, here are my 3 priorities. Let's look at how my time is allocated toward those priorities and make larger shifts into how I allocate my time based on how well it maps to the things that I've said that I'm going to do. So rather than haphazardly saying, we're going to do 30 minutes on each meeting or whatnot, say, if you're one of my 3 priorities, then I'm going to be spending 60% of my time on these 3 things together. If you're not one of those priorities, you don't get on the calendar. Simple as that. So strategy is really these big moves that intend to really redefine how you do your job and how you reach the goals that you've set up. And thus the calendar tactics that drive that time allocation fall from that strategy. And in a corollary as you work through this example is you realize that you can't really have a strategy without having a goal. However, you can have plenty of tactics without having a goal in mind. You see managers who spend enormous amounts of time on like GTD frameworks or optimizing their calendars or doing slight tweaks, but it's not really clear why. Like, what is it that they're trying to accomplish? Just doing their current day-to-day job better, or are they actually aiming for some bigger goal that they have in mind with doing all of these tweaks? And that's really tactics without strategy. It micro-optimizes you and puts you in a local optima, but it doesn't really allow you to reimagine or rethink your time allocation in a better way. So you can't really have strategy without a goal. You can have tactics without a goal, but the power comes when you link all of these things together, where you have goals that give strategies that give tactics. There's so much literature about strategy in particular. It is the purview of any management consultant out there in the world. The thing they think about is strategy. There are roles in every large company or even medium-sized company that is focused on strategy. It's such a rich fount of thinking because it's something that you're supposed to spend a lot of time on as an executive. But we're going to get into the application of strategy to technology in the future. There's one really good book that I'm going to recommend. I'll put a photo of it here. It's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt. It's really, if you're going to read one book about strategy, I would recommend starting there because it's the most concise and cognizant book about strategy, and it doesn't give you a bunch of like frameworks. It gives you a way to think about. Anyways, I just wanted to help you make that distinction. Like, strategies are the big moves that redefine the landscape that you're operating in. It's the things that you do that really change the preconditions, that really use your strengths in a way that allows you to strategically reach your goals. And tactics are all of the small things that follow from that. I'm just going to complicate things a little bit before we round off today to say that one of the things that you see if you do look at a company is you're going to see that there's people talking about strategy at every level of the company. There's going to be the CEO has a strategy, the VPs have strategies, the directors have strategies. Everybody has a damn strategy. And if strategy is really about coordinated action, how does that fit together? Well, one way to think about this is that every strategy is a tactic in a higher level strategy in a company. So your strategy of hiring machine learning engineers might be a tactic in a plan to reimagine your company as a machine learning company by your boss, which in turn might be a tactic in repositioning your business commercially from where the CEO is looking at it. So everything levels up from strategy to tactics. Good example of this, another good example would be like M&A, where you there's few things that you would consider as strategic as buying an entirely different business and buying an entirely big company. But it can also be a tactic. Buying a company in a certain industry might be as strategic as it is, might be a tactic from the CEO apart with tons of other things and a strategy to reposition your company for, say, the cloud or machine learning or any of these big secular shifts like COVID or whatnot. You might see very strategic moves be tactics in a higher order strategy that's being driven to redefine your company. But yeah, it doesn't have to be as lofty as that. It can be as simple as, how do you do calendar management? How do you do hiring? How do you think about your architecture? There's many different ways to think in the framework of strategy and tactics that allow you to really think about, are you spending your time on activities that are going to be valuable, and are you doing things that will redefine in the way that you needed to redefine what the future looks like. We're going to use this knowledge in future episodes as we get more stuck into things where this distinction becomes really meaningful. So I hope this has given you some language to understand what we're going to talk about. And with that, that's it for me for this time. Thank you so much.